best late-night conservative talk show in America, Shankar Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Shankar Sean and Shankar Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here, too. For those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Shankar Radio.
And welcome to Freedom Fest again, 2015 in beautiful Planet Hollywood, Las Vegas, Nevada. It is the 11th of July, 2015. I'm going to introduce you to something that I honestly had never heard of prior, and I am very, very intrigued by this on a bunch of different levels. It's New Way Cities. Did I pronounce that right? Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah.
It's been a long weekend. At this point, I'm not even sure if I get my name right all the time. And with me, I have Shankar Singham, who is from Babson Global. He's a managing director. And then Erick Brimen, who's a partner with New Way. Now, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us about this from the inception, if you will, and to what the goal is, and then kind of tell how you guys are working together to make this happen.
Sure, Shankar, if you want to get started.
Yeah, I think since you're talking about conception, my background is I've done a lot of work in the last 25 years on reform. We worked when the Berlin Wall came down. We worked in the former Soviet Union. We worked in Latin America after the Apertura, and so we worked with countries that were transitioning from closed systems, import substitution, communist systems into market capitalism. And we learned a lot of lessons in that period in the last 25 years. And we were trying to put those lessons into practice in countries around the world that were limited by crony capitalism and the kind of power of vested interest elites and beneficiaries of crony capitalism who could stop reform and stop the benefits of the free market system arising for people around the world. So we're trying to figure out a way of making this happen. And we took the developing trend of urbanization, and we realized that there were these new cities that were being built all over the world, 500 in China, 100 in India, and so on. And could we actually agree an alternative delivery mechanism for reform, for free market reform? Could you actually get this zone, not the whole country, but just the zone, to be a free market-oriented, protecting property rights, competition on the merits, and open trade kind of system? And if you could persuade governments that this was possible, they could generate huge amounts of economic activity. It would be like having a Singapore or a Hong Kong inside your country. And so that was our plan. That was our idea. And we went to about the 60 or 70 governments we'd worked with in the past over the last 25 years, and we found a good deal of take-up of this idea. There's a desperation in the world for economic activity, jobs. There's very little. Regulatory systems around the world, developed and developing countries, are disastrous and going in the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. Economic growth is stalled. Prosperity is stalled. Hope and opportunity are really in pretty short supply. So we thought this is a way that we can actually create that in countries. Now, where Erick comes in is we work with New Way Capital, who are setting up a fund for this purpose, to invest in the land on which these cities will actually be built. So I'll let him talk a little bit about that.
Sure, and so Shankar's now at Babson Global. I graduated from Babson College, and I graduated back in 2006. But while I was at school, I was thinking a lot about these alternative mechanisms of organizing countries and cities. There was an article written about it back in 2005. Once I graduated, went back in traditional jobs, investment banking, private banking, pay off student loans. But this idea was, always cycling.
Just another 20 years and you'll have those puppies paid. Don't you worry.
Well, I managed to do that a lot sooner, so I'm free from that now, luckily. But the idea always stayed with me, cycling back, and I did what I was doing. I started a couple of companies. Some failed, some succeeded, and then fortuitously, I met Shankar, and I found out that he had just recently joined Babson to do this within the Babson Global umbrella, and I was so excited about it. I wanted to be part of it somehow, and we explored different mechanisms in which I could personally be involved, but then discovered that there was this gap for, as in any venture, the early stage capital, the seed capital, the first money in, the one that takes on that risk but also sees the bigger picture and can add something that the other later stage capital can't in the early stages. So we literally created a company around that need, New Way Capital. And working with Shankar inspired me to do that and let go of what I was doing. I was in the process of selling a company at the time and transitioning out. And so now I'm full-time with New Way Capital, and New Way Cities is our initiative to provide financing for this generalized trend. But the model that Shankar has put together we see as the highest potential one, so we're fully backing it.
And Shankar, give us an idea of once the city's built up, running, ready to go, what it'll look like. Because I think that's definitely the most interesting aspect of this. So give us that kind of idea.
Well, one of the things that we started off with is there's a lot of planning of new cities around the world, and it's largely done by architects and so forth, and they'll build these huge towers for financial services and so on, and everything will look like Hong Kong, will look like Singapore. And we take the view that our job is not to do that. Our job is to create the soft infrastructure, the operating system, if you will, of the zone. Our job is simply to create an environment where people succeed or fail on the business merits and their hard work and nothing else, not connections to government, not any of these other things. Now, that's not the way most people live. Most people live in a world where you succeed or fail based on distortions and crony capitalism and all kinds of things like this. So we wanted to create that, and then we believe in entrepreneurship. We believe that entrepreneurs and business people are in the best position to determine how to use that. And in different countries, it's going to be different things. I mean, there may be an air hub in one place, there may be a financial services zone in another. All kinds of different things will emerge. And we're not the ones who dictate what that should be. We want people to figure that out for ourselves. We have only two things that we have to do. We have to create the environment, number one, and then we have to sell the environment. We have to make sure that people know, that global capital knows that such an environment exists. If we do those two things, the rest will happen.
So you'll seed it, and it will grow from there, and it'll grow on its own merits, or whatever the needs of that specific area, for whatever reason, it will kind of self-develop itself.
Right. Well, we have a very good sense of what the economic activity will be in a given place if we get these kinds of reforms in place. So we've developed a productivity simulator that's very, very robust and very, very accurate that shows that if you actually create a zone with this type of pro-competitive regulatory system, protecting property rights, protecting and creating an open trade kind of system, you're going to get productivity gains in countries anywhere between 1,000% in countries that are relatively undistorted to even 4,000 or 5,000% in countries that are very distorted.
And maybe, I don't know, but what do you have in place? What mechanism do you have in place to kind of keep them protected beyond for crony capital? Because all the great ideas, you can have all the beautiful things in the world, but we know government, when it has a chance, a lot of times, once they see something, well, this is going to make money, I have to have my fingers in it as much as I possibly can, as well as people who would try to take advantage of it. Are you guys working on mechanisms to kind of keep that protected? You talked about reforms time and again, but long-term reforms, some sort of way to keep it productive and keep it moving forward versus getting caught in the quagmire of government and crony activity.
Yeah. So the sort of the thing that we really do in order to answer that question is we create what we call a regulatory framework agreement, which is an agreement with the government. It's a contract with the government that embodies two principal things. One is carrots. So we align economic incentives so the government can see that some of the economic activity that's produced in this zone is going to go directly into a trust fund for healthcare and education. It's going to embed the zone into the country. It's going to protect you from people who are likely to try to damage you in terms of the carrot side of the equation. But you also need the stick side of the equation. So you need to be able to convince people. It's kind of like a hedgehog. You want to put enough spines around it that if the government wants to damage, steal, whatever it wants to do with other people, it's going to do that somewhere away from your zone. It's not going to touch this because it's too difficult. So we have investor-state dispute resolution. We have methods whereby using international arbitration techniques that are already well understood. You might say, well, what if the government ignores this? Well, if they ignore this, then their bond ratings go down, their credit ratings go down, they lose investment, World Bank funding goes down. So there are some real real sticks that we can use, and you need both. You need a combination of both. The test of this is, if you looked at Hong Kong after the basic law was put in place in 97, investors didn't trust the Chinese government. They didn't believe that the basic law would apply, but they came to believe it because they came to believe in the basic law, which was the regulatory framework for Hong Kong. So they actually, you saw the value, the investment value, land value in Hong Kong go down immediately after 1997, and then it went up. Then it sort of started to go up, and it's gone up at dramatic levels.
It's still going up. If
Right.
I'm not an expert in that, but yeah, no. Well, you get that knee-jerk reaction. Obviously, everyone's like, "Oh, we're in all the trouble in the world," and then it settles as time goes on, and people, "Oh, okay, well, it's testing the water. You want to make sure that it's not too hot or cold." Do you guys, are you starting to set up kind of target locations? Is that process already begun?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you can talk about? I don't want to.
I can talk about some of it.
Okay.
I can say that we're in a negotiation process with 15 countries around the world. We have about 5 in Latin America. We have a few in the Middle East, North Africa region. We have a number of edge of Europe type countries.
Mm-hmm.
These are countries that, quite frankly, are looking at European Union accession. And European accession has not been good for a number of the Central and Eastern European countries that have acceded, and what they're acceding to, as we all know from the Greece situation, is changing.
Yeah.
And so we're also in Asia, in India, Indonesia, a few other places like that. So we have these negotiations going on. It doesn't take a very long time. It takes about a year. We make it deliberately short. We don't want this to drag on for 5 years. And we
you
want
mean governments would actually drag their feet and take forever to do
shocking,
something that
shocking,
might be... I don't know how that happens, right? Now, how do you... No, I know. No, it's more my question than anything else. When you're working up to this and you're looking at laying the groundwork and getting essentially the finances in place and laying it, are you more selective? Is there... will you look at it and say, "Oh, I don't know if that's a good place," or is that not? Because now we're talking about two different things.
Yeah.
The design's one thing, but when the rubber meets the road or when the checks get signed, do you get apprehensive as to some of the obviously apprehensive anytime you're going to invest? I get apprehensive when I buy a Coke and it's too much money. So, but long term, is it one of those things that you're like, I don't know if this is the right area, or how do you work around that? How do you guys work together with that?
Sure, well, that's a great question, and New Way Capital is one of the things that we really look at, because at the end of the day, as the fund manager, we are fiduciary for the best interest of the investors, and we need to make sure that they make a lot of money so that we can make some money. There's a couple of things I'll mention here. At least for the first money in, the exposure is not a forever exposure. It's not even a very long-term exposure. This capital coming in initially is the capital that structures the project and the land itself in a way that is compatible with later stage investors. So in fact, what's happening is that the capital comes in generally right before the full regulatory framework is in place, aggregates the land, and then just with the RFA, or the regulatory framework, being signed, that is a very strong signal to the market that suggests that the value is actually much higher, right? And there is proxy information out there for free trade zones around the world, and it isn't perfect because this is a much more comprehensive and therefore higher economic value potential. But if you look at those zones, what the land value was right before they get announced and shortly thereafter, you see a very significant uptick in valuations, as in 5 to 15 times uptick in valuations. So the exposure of the investor is limited in the short term with a very high upside potential, and of course at the end of the day you're investing in land, right? So the way I look at it is, worst case scenario, you still have the land, and even if you overpaid a bit for it to get the transaction done and what have you, you still have 80-70% coverage. So you do have some risk, always you do, but the downside is limited, whereas the upside is just as high as you could expect from any of these high potential technology companies that are now so popular for alternative investment.
I was just going to say, the way you explained it, the risk seems a lot lower than I actually thought it would be. I thought it was a pretty high-risk investment, and not because it's a bad idea. It's actually a really good idea, but it's how people accept this. People don't like change, right? Anything that's different, we see it all the time. It's fire bad. It's the Frankenstein theory, right? Everyone kind of... But when you bring this, and especially, in nations where development is so needed, and there's a hunger for it. There's a thirst for it. People, obviously, everybody always wants to better their situation. And it seems like you guys have a way to go into some of these areas and really help those people achieve their full potential. What's the biggest pushback you're getting on this?
So just to come back on Erick's point, one of the reasons we've structured it this way is there are a lot of moving parts to an exercise as big as this. Mm-hmm. And if you don't break them down into small pieces, you'll never actually be able to start. So it's very much an entrepreneurial way of building a project like this. There's the one element that is very valuable at the outset is the initial capital, the initial seed funding for launching the project is the difficulty, because once you have a regulatory framework in place with a government, you have an investor proposition. It either stands or falls as a commercial enterprise. If you've done a good regulatory framework, it'll stand. If you've not done a good one, it won't stand. So the work is being done in countries where there's very, very little economic activity. They're very relatively undeveloped, and therefore the land value increase, which is a proxy for productivity gain and for generating economic activity, is much, much higher than it would be anywhere in any other type of project. So you're talking about very, very high levels of land value increase. And so we brought Erick into this because there is a way of doing this where the investor comes in to acquire the land. You're buying it very low, much, much lower than you would any asset, anywhere pretty much in the world. All that can happen is the RFA is either signed or it isn't signed. The moment it is signed, the land is automatically revalued to very, very high levels. So you have multiple exit points for investors. It's almost, as we say at Babson, it's affordable loss. You put it into somebody's affordable loss if something goes wrong. But there's really very little that can go wrong at that stage. So they're not investing in the whole project. They're not investing in the whole city. So if the city doesn't get built, they get nothing. If the city doesn't get built, they have land that's very valuable and much more valuable than it was to start with.
And like you said, with all the different outpoints, even if for whatever reason somebody hits the nervous button or whatever, it gives them that opportunity to say, all right, well, maybe not this stage. I like this stage, but maybe it's time to move on. How soon are you hoping to get underway? Obviously, the development underway, but how soon from inking a deal and getting it going, let's put shovels in the ground, sort of speak. Where are you looking?
I think I can't really talk about specific places, but right now. But
try that.
I was hoping.
But what I can say is that there are places where I think within a year, we will have that sort of progress.
How long have you been developing this?
Well,
I know you said 25 years and you've worked with, but how long? And this is this your total brainchild?
Yeah, I'm the founder of it.
So, at what point were you sitting on the couch or in an airplane or in the office and you were like, whoa, the bolt of lightning comes through the window and you're like, wow, this is amazing?
Well, it was a very gradual process. What I will say is that 25 years on from sort of the beginning of my legal and economic career, I am very, very fortunate because my career essentially began with the electricity privatization in the UK under Margaret Thatcher. It then went to the Soviet Union during the transition and Latin America. So I've had a more than a front row seat, an actual seat doing things in this incredible period of human history between 1989 and now, when more change occurred around the world for more people than we've really ever seen. And so that gave me a window into a lot of learning and a lot of critical skills and experiences, and probably more experiences than skills, that I could learn from and apply to do something like this. So I recognized that the world has a desperate need for economic growth, economic activity, that literally billions of people could be lifted out of poverty if we were able to remove the distortions that exist in the world. What prevents people from having what we call here in America the American dream, but everyone has a dream everywhere in the world, and it's the same dream. It's the dream that you can better your life and you can better the life of your children. That's every single human being's dream. And what I was struggling with was, despite all of this change, we hadn't seen that for 95% of the people on the planet. that most people on the planet live in a world where they can never better themselves. It doesn't matter how hard they work, it doesn't matter how good their ideas are, that distortions and governments and so forth and crony capitalism and all of this stands in their way. And how could we create a world that is better? And my job for 25 years had been reform, national level reform. And what I was seeing is that it wasn't working. It was getting worse. It was getting harder. The crony capitalists who were $10 million companies 20 years ago are $10 billion companies now. And they will fight very hard, whether it's oligarchs in Russia or vested interest elites in Latin America. And we even see this here with, taxi cab companies opposing Uber and all of this sort of stuff. So it's the same issue. How do we create an environment? And we just sort of fell into the idea of using these zones as a way of doing it. So really, the answer to the question is my whole life has been about this moment. I mean, if I, standing where I am now, and I look back on all the things that I've done in the last, even beyond 25 years, even 30 years, it has all been for this moment. And I was faced with the possibility, a couple of years ago, of either taking it and running with it and doing something with it, or watching the train leave the station. That's not a difficult choice.
No, and I listen. It's an interesting. I know there's so much more that will come out about this concept, and as people read about it, and you can go to newwayfunds.com to find out more on it. /city/FF to be specific, but I'm sure the webpage is pretty well navigated.
Sure, you can go to newwayfunds.com with one W to be clear.
Okay, NEWAYfunds.com.
Right, and you'll see links there also to the Enterprise Cities website, which goes in a lot more detail.
Yeah, so if you want to know more about the operating system and the regulatory system, enterprisecities.com will get you there.
Well, absolutely check it out. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. It's something I'd never heard of before. I'm glad you presented it. It's something I'm completely interested in following and finding out about, and I wish you guys nothing but the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for now from here at Freedom Fest 2015 as we're wrapping up on the last day. You've been listening to the SHR Media Network.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here too. For those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio.
Radio.